Hello, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Emily Rhodes, and today we are going to be talking about A Touch of Mistletoe by Barbara Comyns. This was the December pick for Emily's Walking Book Club. It's got a very appropriate title for this time of year, although the title is indeed something of a misnomer. We'll come on to talk more about it later. I promise it's not just a Christmas marketing ploy. Let me tell you a bit more about the book first. So it is by Barbara Comyns, and it was first published in 1967. And Daunt Books, the wonderful bookshop where I used to work, who now are also a publisher, republished it last year, giving new life to this great book, which has been just sadly overlooked, like so many of Comyns' work, for too long. It is told by Vicky, the narrator, who we first meet as she is a teenager. And it's one of those coming of age novels, which I really love. It starts off in the 30s, it goes right through to the 60s. So we go from her being kind of old teenager to being in her 40s. Obviously that time is quite an interesting one, beginning the 30s. There's the Second World War with the Blitz, which features. There's a lot of kind of social change and terrible poverty that is witnessed in the book. It's quite a thick book, but everybody in the book club was amazed by how quickly they read it. And I think this is because it is written in such an incredibly readable, easy, sort of winning style. It's told from Vicky, from Vicky's perspective. So I just put my cup of tea down there. And she just has this tone of voice that is so lovely to have in one's head. It's like a friend chatting to you on your phone. You can really hear them, and the way she describes things that happen to her. So yeah, one thing to say about this book is there isn't that much in terms of plot. There isn't a feeling of a narrative arc, a clear beginning, middle, end with sort of points of, kind of high point and a low point. Really, it's just stuff that happens to Vicky. Just like in life, it feels slightly plotless sometimes. It's just one thing after another. And it really is one thing after another that hits Vicky. So many awful things happen to her. But she kind of tells us all about it in such a kind of hey-ho, that's just the way it is voice. Sometimes with a real degree of humour thrown in. And I think it gave me this great feeling of strength reading it, and fortitude. That's a word she uses a lot. We must have fortitude. People on the book club, which is hugely international, really felt this was very old-fashioned English. There's kind of stiff upper lip, just plug away at it, it will all be okay. It's just one of those things that happens. Perhaps it is a very English attitude. I don't know if it's an English attitude of today, but she's a very resilient narrator. And I think spending, how many pages is it? 330 something pages in the company of such resilience certainly encourages the reader to take on something of that resilience, I think. To give you, there's so many brilliant bits in this book. There's so much I could read out. To give you an idea of, I think, the humour and also the terrible poverty in the book, I'm going to read out a particular section, which I've now just got to find. I think, okay, so before I read it, on our walk, we talked a lot about Vicky and what we thought of her and her various roles as sister, as mother, as lover, as an artist, as daughter. We then talked about the many other characters in the book. There are so many characters. But it felt like none of them were hugely fleshed out. They all felt like almost devices for us to understand Vicky a bit more clearly and to see her a bit more, to see her more in her kind of relationship with them. And but we did love the characters, the sort of bit parts. And then we came on to talk about the setting. Because I felt like the characters were kind of part of the setting. And we already mentioned the war. Some of the other things, just reaching for my notes here. So one thing to be aware of is that in 1942, there was this thing called the Beveridge Report, which pointed out the sort of terrible poverty, he talked about these 5 great evils, of idleness, ignorance, disease, squalor, and want, and that this report very much encouraged the founding of the welfare state as we know it today. So it was quite political, I felt, that her descriptions of the poverty that Vicky suffers as a middle-class girl, quite naively coming up to London, and how easy it is to slip into this terrible squalor. I felt that there was a political point to this. So I'm just going to read a bit out for you, just so you can see what I mean. So, here we go. Towards the end of the summer, so this is on page 110. Towards the end of the summer, the cuffs of the director of the heating place where Blanche worked, that's her sister, became so frayed that Blanche's daily trimming could disguise them no longer, and the firm faded away and she was workless again. Our rent was 25 shillings a week, and we only had my £1 a week coming in. There was the terrible gas meter screaming for shillings, and when it was empty, our light went out as well as the gas ring. I pawned my portable gramophone, one of my early extravagances, and a gold ring and a tiger's claw set in gold went the same way. To avoid spending shillings, we used candles, but it was a slow way to cook, about 20 minutes to get an egg to boil. For some reason, porridge responded best to candlelight cooking. With the help of the Camden Town pawn shop, we were still able to pay our rent, but the landlady must have noticed the candles or something, because she started pressing soup on us. It was composed of an egg, dropped into the water the dog's meat had been boiled in, and the egg turned into a sinister bird's nest of yellow streaks. We mostly lived on cocoa, thin-shelled stale eggs, and bread and cheap cheese which had maggots in it, big ones descended from flies. We became afraid and noticed things that had meant little to us before. Welsh miners standing in circles, cupping one ear and singing Men of Harlech. An ex-serviceman begging or selling writing paper from door to door. Once one burst into our room and said he had been sent by the Prince of Wales, but we did not believe him. There were long queues of grey-faced people shuffling outside labour exchanges in terrible Dickensian streets, with spilling dustbins outside the filthy houses and children playing in the litter. Poor rickety children with knowing, jeering faces. In Somerstown, coalmen wouldn't deliver bags of coal unless the women showed them their money first. They were often reduced to burning old tyres under their coppers, and the stench used to drown all the other smells of that neighbourhood. So you can see that she's gone from this kind of focus on Vicky and Blanche's situation into sort of zoomed out and showed the situation in Camden Town, nearby Somerstown. And I think in so doing and in showing how widespread the poverty is, as well as these kind of specific examples which are hideous and so detailed. This idea of the egg turning into a sinister bird's nest of yellow streaks. It's so horrible. It's so horrible and also kind of almost slightly funny, if it wasn't quite so awful. So she, it's that classic thing of the personal is political. And I think she's really showing that all these very personal things that happen to Vicky also have political weight. I've highlighted the poverty there because that feels to me to be so vital, just obviously then, but also now. When we don't have shillings in our gas meter, but we're really counting the pennies. Everyone's talking about how much it costs per hour to use which type of heater. We're not cooking over candle flames, but maybe we're looking into getting air fryers. The poverty is back, and maybe we're not burning tyres, but but maybe we will be in not too long. I mean, it feels kind of awful that this was written in 67 and this was about the 30s, and here we are, 90 years on from that, and it's just as bad. So yeah, other political things. Sorry, that was the poverty. There's also, she mentions the marriage bar, which of course was in place till 1975, the Sex Discrimination Act. The Second World War, there's sort of strong portrayals of the war and the Blitz, which again should feel so much of its time, but really sadly with the situation in Ukraine, I think war feels again very much in our lives. Easier to imagine that devastation. She writes about an abortion in quite a lot of detail. It's interesting that the abortion law wasn't passed until 1967, the year this book was published. And the insulin coma treatment, which Vicky's first husband, Jean, really suffers from, was very much in use in the 40s and 50s. So these big issues that she's really engaging with. So through Vicky, through this kind of plotless thing of just stuff happening, bad stuff happening, and what it's like, we see a really political situation. I promise I talk a bit about the title. The Touch of Mistletoe. Person who says, so the whole book is told from Vicky's perspective. She is the voice in our head, but the title, it is actually Jean, her first husband, who talks about the mistletoe. And mistletoe for him is this horribly sinister thing where he is mentally unwell. He's sort of diagnosed with schizophrenia, and one of the ways it manifests itself is this feeling that the trees are shouting out, "I've got the mistletoes, I've got the mistletoes," and this mistletoe being this sort of suffocating herb that's going to sort of stifle them, and the sort of awful things, the awfulness of mistletoe. Here it's just a touch of mistletoe, not a suffocation of mistletoe, a touch. And we had a great chat about it on the walk. What is this title? What does it mean? There's no right answer. It's deliberately vague and elusive. For me, a few things struck me. One is that it is Jean's voice that we have, that she's giving prominence to. And, in today's world, I think a big change, one thing that really has changed since the 60s, is our understanding of mental health and how mentally unwell or mentally divergent people are treated in our society. Neurodivergence is a thing, and we actively try and empathize with people who might see things differently. They're not seen as being wrong, it's just different. And I think it's interesting that, Jean cannot be tolerated in the book. He is sent off basically to an asylum, and, really sadly, he dies at the hands of this treatment, trying to cure him. I think by giving the title to Jean, it's saying, let's look at things through someone else's eyes. Maybe Jean's point of view about the mistletoe. I mean, it's quite a bonkers idea, the trees screaming out, "I've got the mistletoes." But perhaps we need to listen to it. Perhaps we need to think about the touch of mistletoe and see things from his perspective, try and see the world through other people's eyes. I really felt that. I also thought of it as almost like the reverse of a silver lining. If you think of a bad situation, there's a silver lining. To me, a touch of mistletoe is, in a good situation, there's always a touch of mistletoe, a badness there, something, and so much of what we see with Vicky, you think it's going to be okay, but it often isn't. So perhaps it's about knowing that there is always going to be a touch of mistletoe, and knowing that it's okay. It's okay. Things are never perfect. That's all right. We must have fortitude. We must have resilience. I think reading this book will help you get through any mistletoe that strikes at Christmas. So I hope you have a very good Christmas, a lovely break, and I look forward to talking more books with you in 2023.